This video will show you how episode 4 completely changed Aemond to make him betray his brother, which did not happen in the books. Let us first turn to Harrenhal. Though large parts of Harren's great folly were in ruins, the castle's towering curtain walls still made it as formidable a stronghold as any in the Riverlands. But Aegon the Dragon had proved it vulnerable from the sky. With its lord, Larys Strong, away in King's Landing, the castle was but lightly garrisoned. Having no wish to suffer the fate of Black Harren, its elderly castellan Sir Simon Strong, uncle to the late Lord Lionel, great-uncle to Lord Larys, was quick to strike his banners when Caraxes lighted atop King's Spire Tower. So, in the books, the taking of Harrenhal is relatively easy. In addition to the castle, Prince Daemon at a stroke had captured the not inconsiderable wealth of House Strong and a dozen valuable hostages, amongst them Sir Simon and his grandsons. The castle smallfolk became his captives as well, amongst them a wet nurse named Alice Rivers. Who was this woman? A serving wench who dabbled in potions and spells, says Munkin. A woods witch, claimed Septon Eustace. An enchantress who bathed in the blood of virgins to preserve her youth, Mushroom would have us believe. Her name suggests bastard birth, but we know little of her father and less of her mother. Munkin and Eustace tells us she was sired by Lord Lionel Strong in his callow youth, making her a natural half-sister to his sons Harwin, Breaksbone, and Larys the Clubfoot. But Mushroom insists that she was much older, that she was wet nurse to both boys, perhaps even to their father a generation earlier. Though her own children had all been stillborn, the milk that flowed so abundantly from the breasts of Alice Rivers had nourished countless babes born of other women at Harrenhal. Was she, in truth, a witch who lay with demons, bringing forth dead children as payment for the knowledge they gave her? Was she a simple-minded slattern, as Eustace believes, a wanton who used her poisons and potions to bind men to her, body and soul? Alice Rivers was at least 40 years of age during the Dance of the Dragons. That much is known. Mushroom makes her even older. All agree that she looked younger than her years, but whether this was simple happenstance or achieved through the practice of the dark arts, men continue to dispute. Whatever her powers, it would seem Daemon Targaryen was immune to them, for little is heard of this supposed sorceress whilst the prince held Harrenhal. It'll be interesting to see what the show chooses to do with Alice Rivers, considering they can do any number of things with her, from woods witch to a conniving charlatan or castle seductress. In the Riverlands, raiders out of Raven Tree, flying Rhaenyra's banners, crossed into the lands of House Bracken, burning crops, driving off sheep and cattle, sacking villages and despoiling every sept they came on. The Blackwoods were one of the last houses south of the Neck who followed the old gods. When the Brackens gathered a strong force to strike back, Lord Samwell Blackwood surprised them on the march, taking them unawares as they camped beneath a riverside mill. In the fight that followed, the mill was put to the torch and men fought and died for hours, bathed in the red light of the flames. The Brackens and Bloodwoods have hated each other for centuries. This conflict has less to do with Rhaenyra or Aegon being the rightful king or queen, but long simmering grudges allowed to finally ferment into violence without a strong Targaryen monarch to force peace across the realm. Sir Amos Bracken, leading the host from Stonehenge, cut down and slew Lord Blackwood in single combat, only to perish himself when a weirwood arrow found the eye-slit of his helm and drove deep into his skull. Supposedly, that shaft was loosed by Lord Samwell's 16-year-old sister, Alysanne, who would later be known as Black Aly. But whether this is fact or mere family legend cannot be known. Many other grievous losses were suffered by both sides in what became known as the Battle of the Burning Mill. And when the Brackens finally broke and fled back onto their own lands under the command of Sir Amos Bastard's half-brother, Sir Rhaelon Rivers, it was only to find that Stonehenge had been taken in their absence. Led by Prince Daemon on Caraxes, a strong host made up of Daenerys, Roots, pipers, and frays had captured the castle by storm in the absence of so much of House Bracken's strength. Lord Humphrey Bracken and his remaining children had been made captive, along with his third wife and base-born paramour. Rather than see them come to harm, Sir Rhaelon yielded. With House Bracken thus broken and defeated, the last of King Aegon's supporters in the Riverlands lost heart and lay down their own swords as well. Securing the Riverlands was a masterstroke by Daemon, although risky if Aemond and Aegon had immediately flown out to meet him, but they probably wanted to stay and maintain control of the capital. In the books, after dismissing Otto, this is Criston Cole's response to Aegon's recent defeats. "It is not for you to plead for support from your lords, like a beggar pleading for alms," he told Aegon. "You are the lawful king of Westeros, and those who deny it are traitors. It is past time they learned the price of treason." First to pay that price were the captive lords languishing in the dungeons under the Red Keep, men who had once sworn to defend the rights of Princess Rhaenyra and still stubbornly refused to bend the knee to King Aegon. One by one, they were dragged out into the castle ward, where the king's justice awaited them with his axe. Each man was given one final chance to swear fealty to his grace. Only Lord Butterwell, Lord Stokeworth, and Lord Roseby chose to do so. Lord Hayford, Lord Merryweather, Lord Hart, Lord Buckler, Lord Caswell, Lord Fell valued their sworn word more than their lives and were beheaded each in turn, along with 8 landed knights and 20 servants and retainers. Their heads were mounted on spikes above the city's gates. Again, this just ensures those houses become your enemies. But alive, those hostages were worth a lot and could be used to keep the Crown lands from openly supporting Rhaenyra. Back in King's Landing, King Aegon's Master of Whisperers, Larys Strong the Clubfoot, had drawn up a list of all those lords who gathered on Dragonstone to attend Queen Rhaenyra's coronation at council. Lords Celtigar and Valyrion had their seats on islands, as Aegon II had no strength at sea. They were beyond the reach of his wrath. Those black lords whose lands were on the mainland enjoyed no such protection, however. With 100 knights and 500 men-at-arms of the royal household, augmented by 3 times as many hardened sellswords, Sir Criston marched on Roseby and Stokeworth, whose lords had only recently repented on their allegiance to the Queen, commanding them to prove their loyalty by adding their power to his own. Thus augmented, Cole's host advanced upon the walled harbour town of Duskendale, where they took the defenders by surprise. The town was sacked, the ships in the harbour set afire, Lord Darkland beheaded. His household knights and garrison were given the choice between swearing their swords to King Aegon or sharing their lord's fate. Most chose the former. Roost Rest was Sir Criston's next objective. Forewarned of their coming, Lord Staunton closed his gates and defied the attackers. Behind his walls, his lordship could only watch as his fields and woods and villages were burnt, his sheep and cattle and small folk put to death. Word arrived as Rhaenyra and her blacks were mourning Sir Eric and debating the proper response to Aegon the Usurper's latest attack. Though shaken by this attempt on her life, or the lives of her sons, the Queen was still reluctant to attack King's Landing. Honestly, the Blacks shouldn't have wasted all this time with armies and found dragon seeds to ride the 4 other dragons they have, and then launch one massive attack on King's Landing. And if Rhaenyra really doesn't want her children in harm's way, they don't have to participate. But her dragon Syrax, Daemon's Caraxes, Rhaenys Meles, and the other 4 dragons they have should be more than enough to kill Aegon's Sunfire and Aemond's Vhagar, especially with a sneak attack. Munkin, who it must be remembered wrote many years later, says this was because of her horror of kinslaying. Maegor the Cruel had slain his own nephew Aegon and had been cursed thereafter, until he bled his life away upon his stolen throne. Septon Eustace claims Rhaenyra had a mother's heart that made her reluctant to risk the lives of her remaining sons. Mushroom alone was present for these councils, however, and the fool insists that Rhaenyra was still so grief-sick over the death of her son Lucerys that she absented herself from the war council, giving over her command to the sea snake and his wife, Princess Rhaenys. Here, Mushroom's version seems most likely, for we know that 9 days after Lord Staunton dispatched his plea for help, the sound of leather wings was heard across the sea, and the dragon Meleys appeared above Rook's Rest. It was so stupid sending Meleys by herself. Dragons should always go together in squadron to loose iron bolt of the sword that had once felled Meraxus in Dawn. Mealy sucked Vhagar. Criston Cole had sprung a broken hip and burns that covered half his body. His left arm Baratheon and Prince Aemond, not Rhaenyra. Although, imagine if the Blacks had realized this was a trap and the rest of the out of every 10, waking only long enough to take some nourishment before he slept again. This probably would have suited Sir Otto Hightower if he was still hand. None was allowed to disturb his rest, save his mother, the Queen Dowager, and his hand, Sir Criston Cole. His wife never so much as made the attempt. So lost was Helena in her own grief and madness. The king's dragon, Sunfire, too huge and heavy to be moved and unable to fly with his injured wing, remained in the fields beyond Rook's Rest, crawling through the ashes like some great golden worm. And when you get the chance, check out our Game of Thrones inspired choose your own adventure game here on YouTube by clicking the video link on the screen right now.